With the rise of AI, having accessible, accurate, and organized data is more critical than ever. Whether it comes to making informed strategy decisions or training new LLMs, having your information in order is the first step. Today's guest has been building a data governance solution to help companies stay compliant and efficient.
You're listening to Found, TechCrunch's podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups. And today we're talking to Felix Van de Maele, the co-founder and CEO of Collibra, a data intelligence company that helps companies navigate privacy, compliance, and AI integration. I'm Becca Skutak, and here to talk about everything data is my fabulous co-host,
Dominic Midori-Davis. And before we get into our conversation with Felix, we have our two truths and a lie. And at the end, we'll tell you which one of these statements isn't true. So listen carefully. Is the lie that Felix founded Collibra straight out of university with no prior work experience? That the 2008 financial crisis helped the company find legitimacy with clients? Or that their first client was IBM?
Ooh, listeners, you will have to keep listening to find out. But before you do, or after you listen to this episode, if you wouldn't mind rating and reviewing the show, that is super helpful on our end and should only take you just a couple of seconds. But without further ado, here's our conversation with Felix. Hi, Felix. How's it going?
It's going great.
Oh, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure for having me.
Definitely. Maybe if you want to start by telling us a little bit about Collibra.
Yeah, absolutely. So Collibra, we're an enterprise software company focusing on data governance for data, but also now in this world of AI, definitely for AI as well. We started in 2008, so we've been at it for a while as originally a spin-off from the University of Brussels, doing research on semantic technology. How do we bring people together to agree on what data means, and kind of making data meaningful is still our mission to this day. And so over the years, as data has only become more and more important, what we do for organizations, typically large organizations, is to help them trust their data, help them make sure that what they do with data is compliant to a lot of regulations, think privacy, security, and again, now AI, and ultimately kind of use their data more effectively. And that's kind of what we do. We build a software platform, data governance software platform, doing data governance, cataloging, data quality, and now AI governance as well.
And what got you interested in data governance?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. When I started Collibra, I was 23. You wouldn't expect a 23-year-old to be focused or interested or excited about data governance, but I was very, very interested in data in general. And again, the origin story of Collibra is that we were at University of Brussels. We were doing academic research on kind of semantic technology. And at the time, it was a really big thing. Semantic web was a big thing. We called that Web 3.0 at the time. It's a lot of what we kind of now seeing come to fruition in this kind of new world of generative AI, but the ability to capture data in a way that not just people, but also computers could understand and then reason on top of it. And we do a lot of kind of really exciting, compelling things. So our research was always focused on how do we actually bring people together to agree on what data means? And kind of a very, very simplistic example. If I say we have 1,000 customers, you would imagine that's a simple thing, but actually how do you define a customer? It's not that easy, right? If you think about churn or all these other metrics, the definitions is really, really important. And so we started the company in 2008, not initially focused on data governance, but focused on that kind of semantic data, building that semantic model. But then the financial crisis happened. And so suddenly all the banks had to comply to a lot of new regulations, right? Because they had to prove to the regulators that they were in control of their data, because they had to report on a lot of those kind of what they call critical data elements. And suddenly data governance became a really important thing for them. They needed to understand what data they had. They needed to understand how it was defined. They needed to understand all these kind of KPIs, how that was calculated, what the quality was, where it was coming from. And data governance became a really big thing. And we were really well positioned because we helped business people, domain experts, to kind of define what the data meant, how it was calculated, give them the visibility, the traceability on those metrics. And that's kind of how we kind of found our product market fit within data governance. It really didn't exist before we started. Then it became a really big category. And over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, only became more important, whether it's because of data privacy regulations, because of the kind of the move to the cloud, self-service analytics, a lot more chaos around data, and kind of a lot more need to kind of control, understand our data landscape as well. And again, now with AI, governance is only becoming more and more important. So that's kind of how we got to data governance. A bit of a sideway, but that's how we got to focus on where we are today.
And I'm curious, because you guys were spending time researching these kind of areas, while you were at university. What were you looking at then, and how does it compare to what you guys were doing when you started the company, and sort of how did you get from point A to point B?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a straight line, as you can imagine. Again, we were very focused during the research we were doing on how do you bring people together to agree on what data means, and kind of building that shared language, if you will, of, okay, if we talk certain thing, like how do we actually make sure we understand each other? It's a very collaborative social process. But kind of the four founders, we really wanted to build something. We didn't want to just create kind of papers and talk about something. We really actually wanted to build something that was really kind of impactful. And I remember during my time at the university, I did a master's in computer science. I didn't want to start working. I wanted to work and study abroad. So I did another master in software engineering. And I read this book called Founders at Work. So it's a pretty famous book. It's a bit of an old book right now, but it talks about all these stories about other companies at now, like big companies like Twitter and Adobe and all these other companies. And I was really inspired to say, well, actually, this is something that I want to do as well. Like, and all my youthful, I think, ignorance and naivety when as a 22-year-old, I figured, well, if they can do it, why shouldn't I try? And it sounded like something that I really kind of wanted to do. And then the four founders, we got together and said, okay, let's try to start a company. And I think it's not a textbook example because we had some interesting technology and research, but we had no idea what problem we actually wanted to solve, which is the opposite way of actually the way you actually want to do it. So we had to spend a lot of time actually finding kind of what business problem can we actually solve. And so the good thing of starting early is that we had enough time to kind of find our product market fit. And that's kind of, as I said, financial crisis happened, data governance became a big thing. That definitely wasn't kind of the initial plan that we started with. We had, like I said, academic research, and we kind of were in search of a problem. And luckily we found the problem and we're able to kind of expand from there.
That's so interesting to hear you say, because I feel like hearing sort of like general guidance and feedback in the VC startup space, they're always like, don't go with a solution that you don't know there's a problem to.
Exactly.
So it's so interesting to hear that you guys were on that hunt and then were able to kind of land something that, I mean, of course, it's been how long since you guys founded the company? 16 years?
16 years now, yeah.
Honestly, you found the right problem.
Yeah, so the first 4 years were a lot of not giving up and kind of keep iterating to actually find the kind of product market fit. And it took us a while. But again, it was a very different time. Again, 2008, 2009, SaaS hardly existed. I remember when we were trying to raise money as a seed round in Belgium at the time, not an easy thing to do in the middle of a financial crisis. But even enterprise software and SaaS wasn't a big thing. Like the common wisdom at that time was enterprise software was dead. There was no opportunity in enterprise software. There was SAP, Oracle, IBM, no opportunity in enterprise software. It was the era of Web 2.0 with Flickr and photo sharing, right? That's where all the capital was going to. Nobody was doing enterprise software. I think Salesforce just IPO'd and maybe we're, I think, 100 million, 150 million in revenue. So very tiny compared to kind of where they are today. So it was a very different world. And actually for us, it was a good thing because it gave us enough time to iterate and ultimately kind of find product market fit. And so we weren't there wasn't a lot of competitive pressure, things like that at the time. That obviously has changed. But to your point, it's an interesting approach. But I think what is common is that the initial idea that you have when you start a company is very rarely the idea that you actually kind of get success with, right? And I think we have many, many examples that kind of support that.
No, yeah, I was going to ask, what was the startup scene in Belgium like at the time when you first launched, and if you received like a lot of support for your idea?
There was hardly a startup scene. I think there was one kind of pretty well-known startup company, it's called Netlock. It was like, call it the Facebook from Belgium. And they were pretty big in Europe. But I think that's a great example where you got to kind of win globally, and clearly Facebook won and ultimately they got acquired. But other than that, there wasn't really a startup scene. And so that's why that book kind of Founders at Work, where it talks about all these Silicon Valley startups, was very inspiring to me. And it wasn't easy for us to kind of start in Belgium and kind of found a seed capital. It helped us that we were an academic spinoff. It gives a little bit of credibility, which wasn't obvious as, 22, 23-year-olds without any working experience. So that helped. But it's also kind of the VC climate was very different as well. And I remember when we were trying to raise our Series A, we tried to raise from US funds, but none of them were active in Europe, let alone Belgium, right? None of them were active in Europe, and they didn't invest internationally. They were only investing like, hey, if you're not in Silicon Valley, we're not going to invest. Even New York wasn't really an investment capital or hub the way it is today. Very, very different today. Everybody's very much more globally. The VC community is much more globally. There's no problem kind of raising capital in lots of different places in Europe. But that was very, very different 15 years ago.
No, that's so interesting. And also, like, speaking of, I guess, how things were 15 years ago, I wanted to go back and ask, what were companies doing before in terms of data governance, before, I guess, your company came along?
Yeah, and of course, data has been there a long time, but it's only increased in importance over the last couple of years. Right? And so data governance was a bit of a thing, but if you think about how companies did data at the time, analytics, it was a central team. It was like 10, 15 people and a really big company, and they were responsible for all of the reporting, right? So you didn't really need a lot of data governance because it was just inherently by having a small team control it all, you didn't need other kind of additional control. But over time, that changed. Again, where we found initial product market fit was regulatory compliance, where suddenly the data changed really quickly and banks were having to be able to kind of provide answers on the fly. But they couldn't answer where that data was coming from. They needed weeks to provide an answer, but the regulators needed to answer tomorrow. So they just didn't have enough visibility. So that's where data governance suddenly became a really big kind of business problem. And it was associated with the rise of a new role, the chief data officer became an important role in highly regulated industries to get that responsibility. And that was kind of step one. And then step two was with the trend of what we call self-service analytics, where the rise of Tableau and like Power BI and Excel, and everybody almost becoming an analyst and everybody wanting to use data to do their job, whether in marketing or sales or in product. Everybody wanted to become data driven. So everyone wanted to do analytics. So that team of 10, 15 people controlling everything suddenly became a team of hundreds of people, and it became chaos, right? And so there's no more control, complete chaos, duplication everywhere, inefficiencies, lack of trust. And so the problem was that there was too much data and too much analytics, right? And so, okay, we need more control. Like, how do we balance that? And so data governance became more important. And then if you remember, there was an era of big data, right? So we need more and more data. And kind of the analogy that I use there is that we made the haystack much, much bigger. All the data that we have, the data that you need to find that you want to use is that needle that you want to find. And so you actually made it just harder to find the data that you need because you have just too much data, right? Data catalogs and inventories and kind of search and marketplace became really, really important. And then was data privacy. Okay, data becomes really important. So, but how do you deal with sensitive data, PII data, personal identifiable information? We need to treat that in a responsible way. And so, again, we need control, we need visibility, we need to be able to classify all of that. And so that is only becoming more and more important from when we started, it was like an edge case. Whereas today, every single organization, especially in the world of kind of AI equals data. It's really two sides of the same coin. I think of AI as just a really compelling user interface on top of your data. And so it's incredibly important. And so I think that's the wave of importance of data, which requires a strong data foundation, which is strong data governance, is that we've been able to kind of ride that wave.
And thinking of that wave, because you've mentioned this a few times, people thinking about AI now and sort of like how different people thought about data when you guys got started. Tech really has changed a lot since 2008. I mean, yeah, that's not a novel thing to say, but like the way people talk about data, and you've mentioned regulation a few times, the regulations around data have also changed quite rapidly since 2008 as well. And things change quickly. Like, how have you felt your company's been able to adapt as both data needs, how companies use data has changed, but also how the regulation side has changed too? Like, it seems hard to think about scaling when the game changes every couple of months, every year. Like, how have you guys been able to think about navigating that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's what makes me, after 15 years, still so energized and excited about what we do. Not only, I think, is our mission really important, but to your point, the market, the technology is just changing so rapidly. 3 years ago, like AI was there, but it wasn't as big by far as it is today, right? And so just in 2 years, the world has changed and is still kind of changing. And all of that is around data. And the data is only becoming more foundational for everything that we do. And I think that makes the world really compelling. I think we've done a good job as almost being able to anticipate those new waves and act accordingly and adjust accordingly. Like, for example, when we started Collibra 15 years ago, we were on-premise software selling through kind of perpetual licenses, which nobody does now, right? And so we've been through the whole on-prem to cloud migration. We've been through the perpetual license to subscription migration. We've been through a lot of different evolutions from a business model to delivery model to technology models. We've seen the whole kind of on-prem to cloud technology shift, right? And so ultimately, all of that has actually helped us because there's been so much innovation in technology. We've actually taken away a lot of the constraints with respect to the volume and complexity of data that we can process, right? So we're able to process way more data, way more effectively at scale on these cloud platforms. What we would argue is that having a bigger, faster database isn't ultimately going to fully solve your problem, right? That's great, but you still need to understand what data you have, how it's being used, what it means, how you're allowed to use it, to your point around the regulation. So the need for data governance on top of all of that is only increasing. And so it's a very dynamic market, which again makes it very exciting to still be so much focused on it.
And I want to stay on that privacy piece for a second too. How do you guys think about privacy and sort of how that landscape has changed and being able to keep up while still, of course, keeping the things that need to be private and things that need to fall under that category private?
We have this concept as part of our vision, which we call a data citizen. We believe everyone should become a data citizen, and a data citizen has rights and responsibilities like any kind of citizen, right? We believe as a data citizen, you have the right to have easy access to high quality, trusted information. We argue almost everybody needs data to do their job. Like everybody who's using ChatGPT or LLM is actually using data, right? But as a citizen, you also have responsibilities. You have the responsibility to treat the right data appropriately from a privacy perspective, from a security perspective. You can't just share any data. You have to be really thoughtful around like what you do with the data, what data you use, how you use it, for what use case. And that needs to be in balance. And that's kind of how we built the platform. We allow organizations and the people working at those organizations to be data citizens, to easily access trustworthy data to do their better job, but also making sure that they use the right data appropriately. And I think that balance is really, really important. And so how do we help our customers do that? Is by being able to categorize and inventorize kind of all the data that they have, classify it so that actually they know where they have sensitive data, personal identifiable information, and then actually link it to the policies, the controls, the legal teams to make sure that they're using that in the appropriate way. And again, I think that balance is really, really important. And I would again argue in this world of AI, it's only becoming more important. And that's why our AI governance solution, which we recently launched, is getting a lot of interest because same problem with AI. Everybody understands we need to do AI. It's just so foundational, so impactful. And we as an organization need to learn how to truly kind of adopt AI and use AI. But we also need to do it in a responsible way. And there's a lot of risks with AI as well. And a lot of those risks are, to your point, linked to data and data privacy. And so again, doing that appropriately is incredibly important.
And I know you spoke about how US investors weren't like investing a lot in Europe at the time. But for you and your company, when did you start seeing a lot of investor interest increase?
Yeah, so we did our seed round in Belgium with the local fund, and then we did our Series A with Index Ventures, which I think we liked Index because they had both kind of as a European fund that also has a presence in the US. And so it allows us to kind of make that move. And at that time, also, all of the founders actually moved to the US. And so once we started scaling, we really built the management team in the US. And today we are predominantly US company if you look at just headcount. I would argue we're a global company. We think we're a US company and a kind of European company. You want to have the best of both worlds, if you will. But that kind of evolved quite rapidly. And then once we were in the US and scaling in the US, it became a lot easier to also kind of raise capital in the US from US investors. And of course, also the VC community really changed over the last couple of years, where a lot of them have local kind of presence now, where it's location doesn't matter as much anymore as it used to do.
Yeah, I was going to ask if in the really early days, since data governance has evolved so much in these past 16 years, if like investors early on really understood what you were trying to do, or did it take them a minute?
It took them 2 minutes. It took them a while. It's not an easy concept to explain. It's a bit abstract, right? And so that was definitely not easy. And it's also a new category. And I think we always thought of ourselves like we want to build a new category. We're a category defining company. That was kind of what we wanted to do. And there's a lot of benefits to that. But I think there's a lot of challenge to that as well, because nobody understands what you do. There's not a lot of analogies. There's no market landscape. There's no TAM analysis. There's no Gartner Magic Quadrant. So there's a lot of things that are missing, right? Because you're building something kind of from scratch, a new category. Now, the benefit is that you can define a category and kind of lead it. And that's incredibly rewarding. But it was a lot harder for us to kind of explain to investors why what we did was important. The biggest pushback we've always had is that it made sense, but it feels like it's only for regulated industries. And in the beginning, and again, where we found a product market fit was a lot of the big banks. So all of the banks became big customers of ours. And so we had kind of the majority of our customers were in the financial service industry. And so we had to do a lot of explaining to say, look, yes, it's mostly in regulated industries today, but our vision is that data is going to become so pervasive for any organization that this is going to apply and be required and be a must-have for any type of organization. And that's the case today, right? We have customers like McDonald's, which of course are not in the regulated industries, but data is incredibly important for them. Or Heineken, right? Again, data is incredibly important to them. Data is important for any organization, not just highly regulated companies.
More from this conversation right after a quick break. And I know you mentioned that you guys kind of were defining the category when you guys got started, which hence sparked some of the initial fundraising struggling. But you mentioned a little bit earlier on the call that you guys started as the first player, but are definitely not the only player in this space anymore. And I know there's some like thinking in Silicon Valley and startup land that being first is not always who ends up being the most successful.
Yep.
So how do you guys think about how you guys have built to this point as competition has come in the market and been able to kind of keep going regardless?
Absolutely. And it's definitely not necessarily the case that being first is always the best. There's often a lot of learning capital that you pay by being first. I think there's a couple of phases if you think about the competition that we had. When we started, our biggest competitors was IBM, like the big kind of platforms. And it was a very different type of competition. And then there's a few startups. I think in that first kind of wave of competitors, I think we've won that market. We were the clear leader. But then again, the markets evolved and there were different use cases, much more around analytics and big data. And so there were new kind of entrants in the market. And so the competitors changed. And so they keep changing. And we had an earlier discussion around how the market's changing, how the technology is changing. But I think the competitors are also always changing. And now we're in an environment where I don't think anybody questions the importance or the need for data governance. So the moment the need becomes clear and apparent to everyone, it's again the moment that you're going to see a lot more competition, right? Which is not a bad thing. It's also a confirmation of like, hey, what you do is important and there's clearly a big opportunity and a big market there. We feel really good about the position that we've been able to build. We're a kind of largest market share by kind of all the analyst firms. But that's also that makes it kind of exciting to do what we do is that you can never relax, right? It was like, is it Andy Grove that said only the paranoid survive? I think that's just true in technology, right? It's always a bit of a fight and you can never let your guard down because things move really, really quickly and you can never underestimate the small startup that comes from left field. I think some of the large companies kind of underestimated us when we were very little and that was clearly a mistake. And so I want to make sure we don't make the same mistake. And so it keeps us on our toes. We keep kind of making sure we provide the best product, the best value for our customers. And I think that kind of what continues to drive us to this day.
And I wanted to take a step back and talk about building the company because you're not the first person we've had on the show who came from an academic background and took kind of like what they were working on and ended up transforming it into a company of some form. But you are the first person I think we've had on the show who did that on the timeline you did that on. Like we've had people on who are like, I worked on this research for 20 years. I was in my late 40s. And then I decided to kind of move into commercializing the research. What was it like for you being really young, coming just out of college and like gaining the conviction to kind of take that research out into the real world, make it into a company and kind of transform it into what ended up becoming Collibra?
And I get that question from time to time. I don't really think about it because I don't know anything else. Right? But we started the company when I was 23, zero work experience. It's the only thing I've ever done in my career. But I think it's one, I think we got enough time at the beginning to kind of be able to learn and iterate, which was like really helpful. But I think what I've learned over the last 15 years is having the right mindset, I think is really important. And it's often, I think a lot of things in startups are always contradictions. And I think there's not a contradiction where on the one hand, you need to have the conviction and the belief and almost like I said, the youthful ignorance that for whatever reason, you're going to be successful and you kind of inherently believe that. On the other hand, it's also just as important that you know what you don't know. And you don't know anything, right? And so you need to listen and you need to learn and you need to surround yourself with really, really good people that you can learn from. And I think that's kind of that growth mindset is something that I've had from the very beginning. We've had fantastic mentors. I've had fantastic mentors, team members, co-founders, employees, board members. And I've always really tried hard to surround myself with the best people I could find and really always look at everything as an opportunity to learn. Always ask yourself why. If they say something, why did they say that? If they ask that question, why did they ask that? What can I be doing better? And I think it's kind of a mindset that I've always used. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I'm still doing what I'm doing. I think my job today is very, very different than what it was 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But I tell myself and others, like, if I continue to like what I'm doing, right? And if I continue to believe that I'm the right person to do what I'm doing, and if the board continues to believe that as well, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, but with the right mindset to understand that, look, there's a lot that I don't know. There's a lot that I have to learn, but I have the conviction that we'll find a way, even if I don't see it today, to figure it out. And up till now, we've always been able to figure it out by, again, working with a lot of fantastic people to help us in that.
And how did that affect hiring, especially in the early days? We've seen the two schools of thought where it's like we had Parker Conrad on who was like, the founder needs to do everything. They need to do the things they're not good at. They can't hire someone to fix it for them. And then you have people in the other camp who are like, no, you don't know. You hire people who know that stuff and you work together to get to the goal. And so what was it like hiring originally when you were coming out and being like, we want to learn, we want to build something here, but we maybe don't have these other elements that are needed to kind of build a successful company in this space?
Yeah, it's probably a contradictory answer. On the one hand, just look at our experience. We were all kind of academic computer scientists, right? We were starting an enterprise software company, so we had to learn how to sell. We could not sell. So one of the best things we did is we hired a head of sales pretty early. Because after 2 years, we had literally 0 customers and 0 revenue. So we weren't doing quite well. But then having that person on board actually helped us sell. And it became like a quasi co-founder. And that was really important for us. Like we couldn't have figured it out on our own. So that's a great example where, look, we know our limitations. We know what we can't do. We need help and we need to bring in that talent because otherwise it's not going to work. But over time, you do have to learn how to do these things yourself, right? And so you kind of have to do both. You kind of surround yourself understanding what you don't know, but then you also have to be willing to learn the things that you don't know, because over time, if you want to be effective at leading the whole company, you need to have a sufficient level of understanding of how the whole company works. And I think that's the other thing that sometimes I don't see founders wanting to do. They say, no, I'm a technical founder. I just want to continue to work on the product or in engineering. I don't want to have to deal with customers or employees or whatever. Now, with that mindset, no judgment, but I think that's going to be limiting in your ability to continue to scale with the company, right? So I think you need both. I think you need to have the willingness to want to learn and have a level of curiosity to say, hey, I really want to understand this, but also then have people around you that can help you how to learn that and how to learn that kind of effectively and quickly.
Something that I always love asking founders, I mean, you've been here for 16 years, so you must have some really wild stories about things that have happened in your time running the company. I mean, not like, maybe like mishaps. What are some of the mishaps you've had over the past 16 years that maybe it wasn't funny then, but maybe you look back and you kind of laugh at?
Yeah, there's been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of mishaps and learning moments. In the beginning, it's just like it could have gone so many different ways at so many different points in time. There's kind of so much luck that got involved as well. I remember in the very beginning, I think we were running out of money. I think we had probably $40,000 left on the bank, probably like 2 months of runway. And we were competing on an RFP with an account, a government account. So it's a very formal process through an RFP. It was us against IBM. And so a very formal scoring RFP, right? So like you just do the scores and then the vendor, either us or IBM with the highest score would have won the deal. It wasn't a massive deal, but for us it was really meaningful because if we lost that deal, I think we probably would have gone bankrupt. So like everything was on that deal and we won that deal, luckily. But after the fact, I learned that the reason we won it, because we were $1,000 cheaper than IBM, which is a pure coincidence, right? Just a pure coincidence. If we would have put their price like $1,000 more expensive, Collibra might not exist today. And so there's these little moments that kind of make such a big impact. And so yes, you work super hard, but like you need a lot of luck as well at the right points and at the right moments to make it happen. And I always think of that as a kind of a humbling experience because there's a lot of moments like that.
Wait, that's so funny. You against IBM. Wait, why did you price it like $1,000 below? That was just like a number you picked, or?
Random number we picked. We had no idea what the price of IBM would have been. We just picked a number almost in thin air. And it turned out to be $1,000 cheaper than IBM. And that's why we won that deal.
That's crazy. I love thinking about stuff like that. Kind of like leaning onto that question, are there any things you guys were doing on the company side, like leadership-wise, structure-wise, things like that you guys did at the beginning, and now you've been like, we've moved away from that, we shouldn't have done that, or we would have done that differently if we had started the company again today? Like, is there anything like that you can look back on now and been like, oh, we did that because we weren't sure what to do, or we didn't have that experience yet?
The most impactful, both good and bad, kind of decisions I think you make as a founder CEO is always people decisions. It's a big cliche, but I think it's absolutely true. And they're always the hardest. I think a really important moment for us, and the way I talk about it, is kind of if you evolve from a founder-led company to more of a executive management-led company. I think it's a really important pivotal moment in the growth of the company where the core founding team continues to be incredibly important, but you need to scale, you need to bring in kind of more talent that helps you scale. And how do you navigate that? I think sometimes when you delay it too long, you become a bottleneck, and I think you constrain growth. When you do it too soon or you don't do it in the right way, I think you might kind of lose that kind of magic from the beginning and that kind of that culture and the kind of that special sauce that kind of hard to describe and put into words. And I think we did an okay job, but I think it's a tough one to navigate. And I'm still not 100% sure. And I've seen examples on both ways. Like, how quickly do you bring in really talented people that can help you scale, but that come from larger environments, and you kind of optimize for like the operational excellence versus you take the time to develop and grow the team that you have to take on more because you optimize for like domain expertise and cultural fit. And it's a really hard trade-off because the challenge with the high growth companies are growing that quickly. The luxury you don't have is time, right? You're doubling every year, you're doubling your team, everything's breaking, you need help. And so it's very attractive and frankly good to bring in people that can help you scale, put in processes, know what a company at 500 people, 1,000 people looks like. But on the other hand, like that magic of people that have a deep vested interest in the mission and the vision and the domain is incredibly valuable. And so how do you balance both? I don't have the perfect answer yet. And I think the more you can leverage the core team that you have from the very beginning and help them grow, I think the better. But it's a super hard thing to do because, like I said, unfortunately, you don't often have the luxury of time. You got to move really quickly. You don't have people that can kind of take years to kind of help them grow. And so that's a real challenge. I think we've definitely made some missteps. If I could go back, probably made some different decisions. But again, hindsight 2020 is always easy. But I think that's a really interesting and important thing to kind of manage well.
Definitely. We're almost about at time. So I definitely wanted to ask you, what's next? I mean, you guys have been around for 16 years. You've raised quite a bit of venture capital. The space has changed so much since you guys got into it. Like, where do you guys go from here? Maybe something that rhymes with Brexit, maybe something that rhymes with hot to go. What is next for the company?
Look, I think we just keep on building. I think our mission is really important. I think more relevant and important than it ever was. I think, again, with this world of AI, it's all about data. That idea of a data citizen, easy access to trusted data, again, for AI use cases, but also making sure that we're using data responsibly. I think we see it in the media every day. The power of data for good and for bad, that is incredibly important. And I think we have a really strong position. We want to build, like I said, we want to build a category-defining company. I want to be proud of what we built. I want to look back at us with a sense of pride, look at what we've done. And I think we have that opportunity. We're not done building. There's a lot more that we want to build, a lot more that we want to do, a lot more customers that we want to help. And I think we're very, very much focused on that mission, and let's see where it takes us.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Felix, for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And that was our conversation with Felix. Dom, what was the lie?
The lie was that their first client was IBM. They actually beat out IBM for a major government contract in what is actually a really, really funny story. I don't know, that was really funny, like just randomly choosing that number and it happened to save the entire company. That's so funny.
No, stuff like that is always crazy to me. Of course, people who build startups work really hard and not everything is luck, but some of it really is. Just making a decision, like he was even saying he can't even remember why they priced it the way that they did. And it just happened to be like the perfect price for the customer they're trying to get. Like, I feel like so much of making things work like this is that kind of like moments of kismet.
Yeah, this is literally a movie moment where it's like literally the company was this was it. And this was the moment that saved it. That is amazing. That's a movie. They should put that into the reboot of Silicon Valley, this episode.
Yes. I'm always so, like, I just was talking to a completely unrelated AI company, or I'm writing about a completely unrelated AI company. And they were talking about how it's crazy that they're like a seed stage startup, the type of customers that they have, where they're like, we would never would have thought customers like Fortune 500 would work with us yet because we're tiny and like 2 years old and whatever. And I'm like, so that's an element of the story too. Like the government was like, not only is there $1,000 price difference, but one is a huge legacy company that's been around for decades and one's a startup. And they went with the startup for that 1,000. I'm like, how cheap is this government? My God.
I know. Imagine them looking at the budget and saying, ooh, not IBM today.
Yeah, no.
But, you know, this is really, really cool. I love this for them. And I actually really like the company, too. I love a data governance company. I don't know. I just really like data governance. I don't know why.
No, it's also just crazy. I love talking to companies like this who were like ahead of the curve. Like, of course, everyone needed data governance before AI and before some of the technological events that have happened since the company was founded. But when they got founded, he was like, yeah, people didn't even know if they needed this. And now thinking about like how we talk about data governance now and like, sure, they've been around for a minute, but 15 years is really not that long in the grand scheme of time. It's like, I always think that's so fascinating when people are like, we had to convince people it was useful. And now it's like, this is an area that like everyone can't stop talking about.
I know. I love a company that's like, just the timing is so perfect because 15 years ago, I mean, AI was a thing, but it wasn't like the thing. And now it's like the hottest thing ever. And, you know, data, all these things, cyber attacks. There's so many crazy things happening to people's data right now. And imagine just being at the right place at the right time and saying, oh, wait a minute, I could easily help you guys solve this. Like an absolute perfect preparation meets opportunity every time. And then when you think about it, it's like data is, of course, it needs to be governed. I know we asked like what were people doing in the before days of data governance. But when you're looking back, you're like, well, of course there needs to be governance around data. You can't just have loose data.
Right. And like AI aside, the classic thing that comes to mind is like payroll. Like you obviously need to have control and guardrails and an understanding of that data way before you talk about AI, just like running regular payroll, like all company data, you need stuff like that. I did think it was funny when he was talking about the financial crisis and kind of like why that made banks especially realize they needed more protections here. Maybe you caught it, but at one point he was like, things were like this back in 2008, like, And I was like, no, Dom and I did not know.
No.
We were getting ready for a middle school dance then. We did not know.
It's like we really didn't know. And, the more I learn about the 2008 recession, I'm like, well, yeah, that was going to collapse soon. What were you doing? Like, what?
I know. Hindsight is so easy, though. We're like, looking at it now, we're like, geez, what were you doing?
I know, right? But at the time, it was probably like just loose data. I don't know. That's crazy. That's absolutely wild.
I know.
But something else that I loved hearing about was just hearing about the startup scene in Belgium. Because, even today, I don't know what the Belgium startup scene is like. Not saying that Europe was slow to develop a startup scene, but I imagine that like in 2008, there wasn't like a huge startup scene. And so hearing how he was able to break through all of that was also a really interesting story. And it shows how far Europe has come.
Yeah, because I know of course, people started companies in Europe at this time. Like Spotify was founded around this time and stayed in Europe. It's just a reminder of how fragmented that market is, I think is what I'm getting at. Because there were big companies we know of now, like Zoom and stuff like that were getting started in Europe during this time. But it's like all the VCs were like, we invest in this country, we invest in this region, we invest in this. It's always a good reminder of how fragmented that market can be. Less so now, of course. But at the time, yeah, because it'd be surprising to think that they struggled to raise funding because some of the biggest European startup successes happened around that time.
I know.
Or founded around that time.
And it's so interesting to hear someone talk about like, American investors weren't investing in Europe at the time. And now everybody's going to London. So things have changed so much because it's like, yeah, of course we want a European office, not just to vacation, but because there's like so many hot startups there now. And there are always hot startups, but Americans, I feel maybe they've opened their minds a little bit more to what else is out there.
It just really is just like overall, there's so many moments of how this startup just worked because of timing. There's so many elements of why it shouldn't have worked, like being based in Belgium with no startup scene at the time, founded by people who had like no work experience after college, like spitting right out super young from school and going out, like he was saying, finding a problem to the solution they had come up with. And it's like all of those things don't mend well for success. And yet here we are 16 years later.
Yeah, it's definitely a story of luck. I don't know. Working at the same company for 16 years, now it sounds crazy, but people used to do it. But launching a company and staying there and having it be this massive success, this was his first and only company. Usually when we talk to a founder, his age, I don't know how old he is, but like usually there's like a background experience. And so it's kind of cool to see that he basically grew up with this company and was able to go through the ups and downs with the company and with the industry as well.
No, definitely. So you definitely think of people, you talk to someone, I'm going to guess based on the age people generally go to school, that he's in his 30s. People we talk to are usually like, oh, I launched a little thing at college, it failed, and then I worked at Meta, and now I'm launching a company. Or like, oh, my first startup was a minor acquisition, and then I'm starting here, or whatever. So it's just always interesting. He was like, this is going to be my first job out of college. And it's like, well, I'm glad it worked out.
Glad that it worked out, yeah.
Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.